Greetings, everyone. Whether it's good afternoon here in Africa, in Europe, and good morning in the U.S., or I suppose even good evening to any of our Asian guests. My name is Chris Surjak, and I am the General Manager of ROCKBlue, as well as the South Africa team leader for the USAID Water Sanitation Hygiene Finance Project. It's my pleasure today to be moderating this panel discussion. This is the July edition of ROCKBlue's online lecture series, the fourth in the series. And today we're talking about how water service providers can manage the massive reductions expected in revenue during the coronavirus pandemic. And utilities and municipalities around the globe are facing significant impacts to their bottom line from reductions in revenue. Governments are asking, or in some cases even demanding, that utilities and municipalities and other water services providers discontinue making disconnections or continuing to provide water regardless of customers' willingness or ability to pay. So while your obligations and costs have not changed, the funds to pay for those may no longer be sufficient. And we're asking, how will our water service providers survive? How will they cope? How will they continue to drive investment into the sector to meet Sustainable Development Goal number 6? And all of those questions are going to be discussed and debated amongst today's excellent panel of experts, explaining the various approaches that they have either witnessed themselves, experienced, or implemented themselves for addressing this serious issue. This is the first panel format that we have offered as part of this online lecture series. So I'm going to ask you to please bear with me today. Trying something new, and what I'm hoping for, my goal here, is that you will enjoy a wide-ranging, informed discussion and lively debate between a bunch of very, very smart and experienced people that we've got on today. Our panelists do not have any prepared presentations and have not been given any questions in advance. I've got a couple of questions that I'm going to ask to kick off and to guide the conversation. But by all means, we welcome engagement by the audience. We welcome questions for each other. And what we really look forward to is debate amongst our panelists. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce this incredible panel ROCKBlue has pulled together today. Collectively, they've got over 200 years of experience in the water sector and represent a broad range of utility managers and financial directors, government regulators, and consultants to the industry. Kicking off, we've got William Morhewe. He is the founder of 2ML Consulting and executive director of the Global Waters Leaders Group in the UK. William is best known for having successfully turned around Uganda's National Water and Sewerage Corporation. Kelvin Chitumbo is CEO of the National Water Supply and Sanitation Council in Zambia. Sazani Moshidi is Director of Raw Water Pricing Regulation at the South Africa Department of Water and Sanitation and is an expert on water pricing and tariff setting. Johan Kokomor is the Financial Director at Joburg Water. Peter Flower just recently retired as Director of Cape Town's Water and Sanitation Department, where he led the city through the recent drought crisis. Eva Inez is the U.S. country manager for Aqualia, which is the third largest private water company in Europe and the sixth largest in the world. John Mastracchio is vice president at Raftellus, which is a financial and management consulting firm for public sector clients. And we're really happy to have John on board today. He recently published a research paper in association with the American Water Works Association that quantified the financial impacts of COVID-19 on U.S. water utilities. So having given that introduction for our panelists, and before we kick off them, I would like to hand this presentation over to Peter Macy, President of ROCKBlue.
Thanks, Chris. So for those that don't know us, the core purpose of ROCKBlue is to make a dramatic contribution to that which you mentioned, SDG 6, UN Development, Sustainable Development Goal 6. Specifically improving the lives of the urban poor in the developing world by supplying water and sanitation for all. And our work has become increasingly more urgent due to the ongoing pandemic. So I'm delighted to see the panelists that you've assembled here. ROCKBlue partners with utilities by being a mentor and a connector. As a mentor, our roster of over 110 specialists offer management level expertise in 21 different categories of utility management to help them achieve greater efficiencies and sustainability in their operations. Our services are free to the utilities and have no end date. That is, we're committed to assisting them for as long as it takes until they're self-sufficient or they no longer need us. What else would I like to say about ROCKBlue? We're also a connector. So we connect utilities with the resources that they need, such as the talent that you see here in this panel discussion, connecting them with financial resources, technical expertise from our roster, and other sources to help them deal with the challenges that they have. So Chris, that's it. Thank you everyone for participating. Thank you for all the attendees. Enjoy the panel discussion.
Thank you, Peter. Peter leaves it to me to plug ROCKBlue's website. We encourage everybody to check us out at rockblue.org. Moving on, just a few logistics before we kick off. Today's presentation or panel will be recorded, and the recordings will be made available on rockblue.org at a later date. When you check over there after this session, check out our recordings of our previous online lecture series. On your screen, you will see likely at the bottom a button marked Q&A. We encourage all of our participants today to use that to interact with the panelists and provide your questions. We will address them as part of our discussion. We'll incorporate them, and any that we don't get to, we'll actually endeavor. We will record those questions, and we'll endeavor to get back to you by email following the presentation. Finally, at the end of today's session, when you exit the Zoom meeting, there will be a short survey that pops up. Please, 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 I encourage you to take that survey. Your feedback is very important to us, and we've used it to continuously improve the offerings that we get through this lecture series. We've got approximately an hour and 50 minutes remaining on today's panel session, and I'm going to propose that we'll take a series of breaks, comfort breaks, to give our panelists a short rest during that on probably a 30 to 40 minute time basis. So with no further ado, and if there's no technical questions from the panel or the audience, I'm going to lead off with a question. And I will add that I will be addressing questions, because we have a large panel today, I will be addressing questions to individuals, but I encourage all of our panelists to jump in and participate at any time. So I'd very much like to hear from our current utility managers and financial directors in particular. And I also want to hear from John's very pertinent research into just how bad is it out there? What are you seeing in terms of drops in revenue collection, reduction in collection rates, and I'm going to leave it at that. How bad is it out there? Okay, Kelvin, I'll put this out on you. What are you seeing in Zambia? How bad of a hit is the country's utilities taking in terms of drops in revenue?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I think the situation is quite real in terms of the drop of the revenue. What we've seen on average, utilities who were able to at least collect in average of 90%, that has reduced to almost 65% on average. And one of the issues that has contributed to that is the same directives that look during this COVID, let's not disconnect. And I think that has hit quite badly on the utilities. So utilities have effectively lost not less than 15% of their revenue.
Did I hear that correctly, Kelvin? 50%?
15%.
Thank you. Hey, Johan, have you seen something? What have you seen in Johannesburg?
Thank you, Chris. In Johannesburg, what we're seeing at this stage is that there's not a humongous drop in revenue as such, which means that people are using similar levels of water. Where we have a huge impact is on the payment levels. So where the revenue has reduced on a month-to-month basis, well, since COVID started by not more than 5%, which is not huge. I mean, it's a large number, but it's not huge. However, the payment levels have dropped to something in the past few months, you would see a drop every single month, whereas in the month of June, our payment levels have dropped to in the 40%. So it's sitting at about 48% or so, which is very far from where we normally are, close to 80% or more than 80%. So that is huge. That has a humongous impact on our cash flow. So I mean, you can imagine if we have a whole month where the payment levels are this low, for the month we can probably survive it, but after 3 months it's starting to hurt. And I can imagine in another 2 or 3 months it will just wipe out our cash balances. We would just start going into humongous overdrafts. So that has a huge effect. The other effect that we have is on our bulk purchases, because we buy all our water that we sell in the city of Johannesburg from Rand Water. And the purchases are going up. So what's happening is we have been distributing bulk water tankers. We into the informal settlement environment, just to assist in that area. So we've more than doubled all the water tankers that we had out there. On the other side as well is we haven't done any disconnections for credit control. But beyond that, customers who have previously been disconnected for illegal connections, we have reconnected all of them as well, which means that there's now a much bigger population making use of water. So our bulk purchases is going up, the revenue is slowly coming down, and the payment levels have just bottomed out.
John, is this reflective of what your study has found in U.S. utilities?
Yeah, it's similar. So a recent survey that the American Water Works Association had done in June indicated that about 75% of all utilities in the U.S. were experiencing financial impacts of COVID, and we did some work in April and May to quantify that and identify where those financial impacts were coming from. And what we found was that there was a larger percentage of revenue impact on the commercial side, and that was due to some pretty widespread mandates for employees to stay at home and not go to work. And so that was when we looked in March, April, May, those stay-at-home orders were pretty widespread. And that had the effect of reducing commercial usage and commercial revenues for utilities somewhere in the range of 10 to 35%. But because many workers were at their homes, there was an observable increase in residential usage to offset those commercial reductions. So the net impact was roughly somewhere in the 5 to 10% impact on revenues from that particular component. But in addition to that, we're also experiencing higher delinquencies, and that will likely translate into higher revenue write-offs in the future. And normally in the U.S., long-term delinquency rates and write-off percentages of revenue are somewhere in the 0.5% to sometimes 2%, 3%. So not very significant in terms of long-term delinquencies or write-offs, but we're seeing that jump up, and we had projected, based on very high unemployment rates here, that may increase to around 6% or so. So that's, if you add that to the commercial revenue reduction, we're talking about revenue impacts of somewhere in the 10 to 15% range.
John, thanks for that, and it speaks directly to a definition that I did want to put out there. And thank you to the financial guys for pointing that out. The key difference being between, i.e., what's been billed versus collections, and I think that's worth unpacking a little bit more for Kelvin and Johan and our other panelists. What are we seeing in terms of those long-term delinquencies? How much of that is considered is expected to become unrecoverable debt?
Hi, Chris, if I may come in there. To add on what Johan has said to you in terms of the challenges with revenue collection, on a national perspective, we are having a bit of a crisis that we are going to end up dealing with. In South Africa, we have been struggling with the revenue collection, where a number of municipalities were not paying their bulk water accounts as they are expected to. So between the month of April and May, we have actually seen an average of 60% non-payment. So our debt levels have grown, and we anticipate that by the time this pandemic is over, our debt levels are going to be too high to even manage. And currently, within our financial policies, there are challenges in terms of doing write-offs or even finding a way of going around this water debt. And this 60% that I'm talking about is just the debt to water boards only. I have not even covered the debt to the department in terms of raw water. So, the amounts are just going crazy as we are sitting here today. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Sinzani. I think it does a great job of putting things very much in perspective. A question for, and I'm going to address this initially to Peter and to Eva, but I encourage everybody to drop in. If we're expecting this big of a hit on collections, on what do the impact on short, medium, and long-term investment plans? I know that Cape Town, for instance, has a very aggressive 10-year investment plan intended to build the resilience to avoid a repeat of the day zero crisis. I know that elsewhere there's a huge backlog in investment necessary, and of course we're all striving to achieve SDG 6. What are we looking at? And feel free to speak sort of short-term, medium-term, long-term. I'll hand it off to Ava to lead with that. If she's got some perspective on what she sees on a global basis and within the U.S. Or Americas region.
Okay. Well, from here, good morning to everybody. Thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure to be in this panel. And well, Aqualia is providing water to almost 25 million people in the world. And I mean, we have a very diversified activity. And I think that has been, I would say, our strong leg in the water sector. That's because we are so diversified. We had some areas where we had these revenue drops, but other areas have not been affected. Another good, I would say, thing about our business, our service is that we mostly serve municipalities and residential areas. So that has been sometimes not even reduced, but has been increased, the amount of water that they are asking. So if we balance, the areas, I mean, in Spain, for instance, we have some municipalities in the coast that we have seen revenues drop in 70% because all the business, everything was closed, hotels, restaurants, everything. But we have compensated those drops in revenues with most of the other municipalities in Spain where it's mostly residential, and we have not suffered that drops. Another good thing about Aqualia is that we already had implemented more of the technological media available. So we have our web page almost on every municipality where we are working. We have a call center. We even have some app applications where you can pay online. You can use all the technological infrastructure that exists today to get your bill paid and to get your bill up to date. So on that sense, I think we were quite well prepared for what has come. So the consequences have not been very severe. However, I mean, I wanted to explain one case that I consider has been very successful, but also it has been a great challenge for Aqualia. We just entered into some new concessions in Colombia in March, just when this COVID was starting to hit that part of the planet. There we are operating 13 municipalities. We are providing potable water and sanitation in all of them. And I would say in most of them, we had to start the operations virtually, and that was really a challenge. We had everyday meetings, 3 hours, discussing with all the operators, providing them training. We have to do a lot of procurement online. That's usually is not done that way. So it was really a challenge. Also on those contracts, the government in Colombia, they did, I want to explain 3 things that they did. First, they freeze the tariffs, meaning that we were supposed to get an increase in the tariffs and we didn't get that. Okay. Then also it's not that we were not allowed to disconnect any consumer, but also we had to reconnect everybody that was already disconnected. And we couldn't charge any connection fee or anything because it was not allowed at that time. So we had to reconnect everybody. Also, the other thing is in Colombia, the water tariff has 6 different levels. I mean, the number 6 is the the people who pays more, the wealthiest population, and I would say 1, 2, 3 are for the poorest levels, and that is distributed depending on your income, the household incomes, depending on the neighborhood where you live, you pay different tariffs, and also depending on the type of house. I mean, you have a former house or you live in a small apartment, so they have different tariffs. And usually the wealthiest population, they pay for the water or for the cost of the water that the poor people cannot afford to pay. So more or less this is somehow balanced. But in this case, as we just started to operate the systems, we found out on the first month that we had a drop of collection of bills of about 60%, because we were not able to go to the houses to get the money. And the offices were closed at the beginning, so it was really a challenge. Since day one, we implemented training to all the employees, first in health and safety, for them to, be prepared for COVID. We provide them with all the masks, or all the safety equipment that they needed to be able to make their own work. We on the different offices, we put all the all the shields, all the instructions. I mean, everything. We did all those measures. So in 1 month, and even also we implemented a new web page, a new app, a new call center, everything. So in the second month, we saw that this collection went from 60% to 40%. And we also did lots of campaigns on the streets, even with the headphones, explaining people how they could give us the readings, their meter readings, how they could pay remotely, trying to educate the population on all that. Also, we had, stakeholders. We involved all the stakeholders. There was
thanks, David. Yeah. Thanks for that response. I think that really speaks well to it. I want to come, John, I see your hand up. I do want to hear from Peter and William on this as well. I want to introduce there was a question from the audience that I'd also like some of you to start to address. He notes, Leo Mehar notes that in Zambia, they're facing a condition of double jeopardy, where due to exchange rate fluctuations, the cost of inputs, especially chemicals and spares, have gone up while their cash flows have gone down dramatically. So to the extent that you can touch on that in responses. What I wanted to do in reaching out to Peter and William in particular is the idea of addressing a crisis. We're in crisis management at the moment, and both of you have a history of successfully navigating those. Peter with the drought crisis in Cape Town, William with a turnaround project in Uganda. And how do we, in light of this pending financial crisis, how do you keep your eye on the long-term objectives? How do you keep morale up and manage this from a crisis perspective while continuing to deliver services?
Hello? Hello, can I come in?
Please.
Yes. Okay. First of all, thank you so much for having invited me for this discussion. I belong to a consulting firm called 2ML, and we work across the continent and even beyond. And when you called me for this session, I made a few telephone calls, and I was trying to get across Africa to see how people are managing during this pandemic. My first call went to Nairobi, and the manager there told me that, yes, they have had a big problem as far as revenues are concerned. But all in all, he said the reduction was in the range of 10 to 20%, well, so which was manageable. I crossed over and then rang Nigeria, where some of my staff are based. And there it was very difficult and different. In one state, there was almost a reduction up to 0 collection. As in the month of March, they recorded 0 collection. You can imagine. Nothing was collected. But then after the lockdown, revenues kept coming up, and they told me that as we talk now, I think they have almost reached maybe half of what they have been doing. Now, in my country, Uganda, where we are, the situation is quite different. Apparently, yes, they have suffered a revenue loss of up to, on average, maybe 10 to 20%. And of course, they are having lots of maneuvers to make sure that this does not affect their overall investments and operations. And I think coming to your question, it's all a matter of how you incentivize your staff to make sure that they go out in the field, spread the word that yes, water, we are not going to disconnect you, but note that if we don't pay now, you'll pay in future. So it's up to you. We are putting a credit or a debt on your account. So you either pay now, if you can, but if you don't pay now, you still pay in future. And in Uganda, I think this has worked so well to the extent that most of the customers are actually paying. Even those who have been disconnected, they now know that water is more essential than ever before. So, and I was surprised. If I went up country in the whole of last week, and you could find on each residence they have a tap outside, washing hands, making sure that there is water available all the time, and apparently people are paying for the water. So now I think now when it comes to areas like I've talked in the western part of the continent, where revenues have gone up to 0. Of course, when it comes to investments, I think that's where the state has to come in. And I've been debating with myself, there's the issue of private investment versus public investment. And I think when it comes to private investments, those of you who have got private companies, I think this is a period that you may think of pulling out. When it comes to public investment, I think the public now has to come in a big force, because if you go to countries where they are collecting less than 50% of the revenues, there's no way operations can take place. There's no way salaries can be paid if the state does not come in. So it is varying from country to country, from utility to utility, from investor to investor. If it is a private investment, certainly that's a very big problem. And as for the public, well, if the public is the one which is issuing the guidelines, they must feel the pinch of making sure that now they put money on the table, maybe more money than ever before.
Peter, I wanted to bring you in on this one to talk to the idea of crisis management. How do you communicate the challenges that the water service provider is going through? How do you make sure that your day-to-day operations continue to supply water to the best while implementing new ideas and new responses to the current crisis? And how do you keep your eye on the long game?
Chris, yes, thank you. And thanks again also from our side for inviting me onto this panel. To share some of the experience from our previous crisis, I think maybe just to set the scene as well, Cape Town is not in a very dissimilar state to things like Johannesburg, where we heard from Johan. Collection ratio is down. Revenue is not really the problem, but it's the collection of the billing. And that also dropped from about close to 90 to somewhere in the mid-50s. It's starting to recover now. But the impact right now, fortunately, is not too bad because we're at the lower point of our normal revenue collection time, because being winter, normal consumption is relatively low in Cape Town. So the impact is not as severe as if this had come about during the midst of summer. But nonetheless, it is still concerning. In terms of dealing with that from a crisis perspective and how we had to manage it during the drought too, where naturally we had financial constraints, it's easy to talk in hindsight. It's always good to have a plan in place for emergencies. Now, generally, that doesn't happen until you have a big emergency. And then you wake up and you put in place an emergency response plan for the next time. So in some senses, the drought crisis that Cape Town went through has helped Cape Town prepare for next type of crisis. Not necessarily the same one being this COVID-19 one, but some of the things are similar. It's essential, obviously, we all know this, is that water is key to maintaining good health and to keep the low level of transmission down. So it's absolutely essential that we don't compromise services, particularly into the poorer and indigent is far more is a stronger possibility. So what I know the city has done has been to, in fact, improve and increase services into those areas, even if it has meant maybe pulling back on some of the sanitation and solid waste removal services in some of the more formal areas, in order to compensate. In terms of managing the financial situation from a short-term point of view in the crisis, and these are things that are being done currently now in the city and were done, is to look on both sides of the equation, obviously. And on the expenditure side is to go and look for non-essentials and cut them down to the absolute minimum or eliminate them entirely. And for instance, posts, stop filling of vacancies at the moment, cut down on training, travel, conferences, etc., etc. And of course, on the put any new initiatives that are likely to expose you financially on hold as well. You mentioned the 10-year strategy, the recovery strategy from the drought. Now, that is obviously a very important thing to continue with and not to compromise from a supply risk in the future. One thing that is fortunate is that we're in the midst of a very good winter, and just in this last 7-day period, this last week, the dams have risen 12.3%. And we're up in the mid-70s now, getting into the 70%, which is the highest it's been for the last 4 or 5 years by a long way. So it's looking good for the immediate short term and medium term. But nonetheless, the capital spend going forward, I know the city is intending to maintain that as best they can. The immediate impact of those capital expenditures is not hugely severe on your operating expenses, so it's not too much of a crisis to continue with that. In terms of the revenue side, now we use a term in Cape Town, I used the term while I was there, called slippages. Maybe that's understood elsewhere as well. Effectively, it's underspending on expenditure items such as vacancies on your staff budget, and any other general expenses where you haven't spent to the extent that was budgeted, and you steal those away and put them into where it's essentially required. And this can be done within the service. And certainly in a crisis like this, I would imagine what is done in a lot of municipalities is to look at the non-essential parts of the services that are provided to the city in general and cut down heavily there to be able to funnel that funding into the areas of priority with regard to water service, solid waste removal, etc., etc. So those are the immediate sort of short-term actions that one can take to prop up your business. The longer-term view really is to make provision, and going back to the biblical thing of making provision for the lean years during the good years is always a good thing. And I think Cape Town is relatively fortunate in that it has fairly good reserves that it's essentially relying on right now to carry it through. But like Johan says, it cannot continue indefinitely because it starts to hurt seriously. So, I could go through a lot of details of actions during the crisis, but maybe that's enough just for the moment.
Chris, can I come in?
Yeah, yes, please.
Yeah. In fact, when we are talking about the reduction in revenue, you talked about what has happened in Zambia in terms of the increase in the costs of producing water. Not only have we seen increased in terms of cost for chemicals, but I think beginning this year, the electricity tariff went up by above 100%. Some of the utilities, I think they were calculating something like 140% increase in terms of electricity. Obviously, that becomes a huge impact. And we've seen some of the utilities committing over between 40 and 60% of their revenue to paying electricity. Obviously, that becomes an issue that makes the utility difficult to operate. Now, coming to some of the strategies that we've seen or what we've encouraged the utilities, and some of them have implemented, I think one of the issues that we've seen that works well is to engage the customer. You need to appeal to the customer so that he begins to see the value of you continuing to provide the service. And the soft issues should kick in now, especially the staff in charge of public relations, to just get to the customers and just, appeal to them and motivate them to be able to pay for the service. The other way is, how do we make it easy for customers to pay? We've seen a number of utilities now go online. There is mobile money now. Let's make it easy for the utilities, for the customers, not to give an excuse for not paying. But someone that is getting a good service is motivated to pay as well. So we need to engage, customers and just give them a service in spite of the fact that we're struggling, that they're able to appreciate. And we've seen quite some innovations in some of the utilities that are reaching out to the customers so that they're able to see the need to be able to pay. But what we've done as well is this is a service that is being done on behalf of government. And government also should be interested to see that the utilities are sustained. And we've been able to engage government. And one of the things that we've seen is that government has begun to pay what they owe utilities, to just try and assist utilities, managing this difficult time. And some of the utilities that are small and have been struggling, they've even been given some grants. So again, you need to have a skill to engage government and say, look, the utilities will just stop functioning at the end of the day if we allow them to continue at this rate. So government definitely needs to play a role. One of the other areas that we've also encouraged utilities to consider is, there are some what people would call low-hanging fruits. I think we are losing a lot of water in commercial losses. The physical losses, maybe that need a bit of some time and also investment. But how do we deal with the commercial losses to just ensure the utility is able to bill for that, a loss that is not being billed for? So again, you need to have those soft skills and initiatives to try and see how do we reduce on these losses that commercially oriented. I thought I should just mention those issues.
Can I come in, please, Chris?
Please go ahead.
I see there is also a question that is addressed to me. What are the mechanisms put in place to ensure that the wastage of water by consumers is reduced to the bare minimum to trickle down to reduce utility bills? Now, here in South Africa, the billing system is different between water boards and to municipalities. So on the municipal area, they have a rising block tariffing system, of which it aims at curbing wastage. But that has not necessarily seen that much success because a lot of municipalities nationwide are still registering a high level of non-payment. Now, when we are talking about the systems changing into how we can deal with the COVID-19, it becomes a little bit tricky because a lot of municipalities are still sending hard copy bills, meaning that you expect the post office to have somebody that will deliver the bill to you. And during this COVID season, not all areas are actually receiving post. And we do have, unfortunately, customers that are still believing on the fact that until I receive a bill, I'm not going to the municipal offices to pay. And we still have the population that does not believe in electronic payments. So we have a bit of a long way to go in terms of electronizing the way we are getting our bills. Even myself in my municipality, I'm still getting a hard copy bill, even though there are platforms that I can pay electronically. But the fact still remains, I have to get a hard copy bill for me to pay electronically. Sometimes the two don't match. If I may take myself for an example, because I don't really know what is my average spend, it fluctuates month to month. I cannot even put a recurring payment on my bank so that, the municipal account can go. So when it comes to rising block tariffing, that should help us in reducing the wastage. But we see more wastage in the areas which are called indigent, because some of them, or the majority of them, are paying bare minimum and they are being cross-subsidized from other areas. So that is a bit of a tricky situation. And unfortunately, there is a rippling effect. If the municipality is struggling to collect revenue, therefore they will also struggle to pay the water board. By default, they will also struggle to pay for their raw water charges as well. So this thing is really a mind block. And as Eva was talking about how things could change within a month, you put this in place, put that in place. I think it's something that our utilities, all of them in this country, can learn from that process and how versatile we can be in changing systems. And I must also say, one of the biggest challenges we are seeing is that COVID lockdown for South Africa came literally immediately after the tariff increases for bulk water charges. Now, when the process has been concluded and now we are looking at implementation, then COVID hit. And then we are requested to reverse the process. We can't, because all the input costs have already increased, and the plans that are there to either expand or improve on the quality of service delivery have to continue. All the infrastructure investment that needs to be done, it cannot be stopped. But again, it's a double jeopardy, because the increases have already been approved. Now this pandemic, now the collection is being hampered, which basically renders the increase ineffective. So people are really building on more debt that we are hoping to come up with better strategies of how we collect in future, because none of the utilities are allowed to disconnect people. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. That was great.
Hi, Chris.
Okay.
I did promise my panelists a comfort break. I would encourage everybody. The conversation's been too engaging, and I don't want to slow it down. I suggest that we take 2 to 3 minutes just to stretch your legs. And if anybody needs to take a break, please do so. We will return at 25 past the hour, according to my clock.